Hello everyone. Today we'll be discussing societal reaction and the existential, and in particular, the Goffman reading on stigma and social identity. So in this reading, stigma is defined as an attribute that is deeply discrediting and not ordinary or natural to society. This stigmatizing mark works to differentiate and separate marked individuals from unmarked ones because of the associated judgment that marked people are tainted and lesser. In fact, stigmatization reduces the individual from a complex whole person to this single tainted and discounted trait. This creates a discrepancy between the virtual and actual social identity, as all the other positive attributes of the marked person is disregarded. Stigma then is a result of social relationships, as there must be a stigmatizer and a stigmatized person. Goffman goes into further detail on how the two interact with each other, but there are two main phases that govern the behavioral pattern of the stigmatized. Phase one being when they learn and incorporate the standpoint of a normal and societal viewpoint. And phase two, when they learn in detail the consequences and what it means to possess the stigma. Now we'll look at a case study on homelessness. In this particular case, we see a rich kid that has to experience homelessness and see how their perspective changes through their experience.
Growing up around her self-made millionaire father has provided Isabella with a strong work ethic.
I don't technically have to work, but I want to work.
Combining a job as a talent consultant and high-class headhunter with studying for a master's in business psychology means Isabella is not shy of hard work.
I have drive, I have ambition, there's a lot of things I want to do with my life.
But driven Isabella will give up both her job and her glamorous lifestyle to sleep rough, as she believes getting out of homelessness is merely a question of attitude.
Definitely say some people have become comfortable being homeless and they don't have the get-go every day to make a change. There's a lot of drugs, a lot of drinking. Homeless people could actually do more to get themselves off the street.
So that was before she experienced homelessness and what preconceptions and her viewpoint about the stigma, and then this is her first night trying to deal with homelessness.
Her depth, Isabella approaches the first homeless person she sees.
Hi, it's my first night homeless. I don't know, where can I stay?
Very simple offer. You can sit next to me, innit? It's my spot, innit?
Is that your spot? So there's like no shelters or like churches?
No one will disturb you, but if you're in extreme situation, you have to speak with the
So we see how her entire attitude changes, and she goes from a very confident person to a more timid person that needs help. And then now we look at how she interacts with a daughter of a homeless person.
You're wee-wee. When I met your mum, I didn't realise at first that she had kids.
Yeah.
And if it was my mum, I couldn't imagine.
It's very stressful knowing that I can't physically help her get off the streets and physically help her to get into a house or anything like that. It does stress me out quite a lot, and I do worry about her being on the streets, being a woman as well, being on her own. A lot of people would quite maybe be embarrassed about it, and I just think, well, it's my mum at the end of the day. I don't care. If you don't like it, then it just shows me you're not a very good friend to me. I believe in second chances. Whatever happen. You're still my mum, and I want to help you and help you get like to a better place, sort of thing, and get on the right path again. So yeah, it's stressful, very stressful.
Do you think she'll get there?
And that brings us to the end of the case study. So over here we see that there's an initial idea of what it means to be a homeless person. So Isabella thinks that they are lazy and unmotivated and they deserve to be in the situation they are in due to like drug addictions or alcoholism, and that they can be dangerous or threatening. And she even thinks that homeless people are often without a family. thus discrediting all their other attributes that make them a normal person, and she only thinks of them as homeless. So we can see how this social identity crafts the behavioral interaction between homeless people and normal people. So first off, we see how Isabella was very confident, and then after that, when adopting a homeless, when she became homeless, she was more like timid, and that she looked for help from homeless people when she wouldn't otherwise interact with them. We see how the daughter of the homeless woman suffers from courtesy stigma and how she deals with it by showing support for her mom and explicitly stating that she is not embarrassed by her and she's willing to give her mom a second chance. Now we'll move on to our next case study.
Yeah. So for case study 2, we'll be talking about a more recent event. And I think that most of us can feel that we are more related. We can relate more to this situation compared to homelessness. So COVID-19 started earlier this year, and it started in China. So you can see that for objective identity, a lot of the people that were stigmatized throughout this whole period started off being like Asians, which was mostly during the first phase of the contagion. Then Asians were mostly targeted in US or UK or Western countries. And after that, increasingly, and many other people in different countries are also targeted for this stigmatism, namely recovered people, people released from quarantine, or the social group that were first contaminated by the virus. This kind of discrimination also translated to aggression or avoidance, and specifically even against doctors, nurses, and just generally the patients. Logically, we know that these groups of people are no longer a danger to society, and they might have never been such a danger to society. However, for society, they are still largely seen as a threat to other people's well-being, which is why they are targeted for this aggression. And things were worse when social segregation comes into play. So in different countries, we have different methods of dealing with COVID-19, and one of it is segregation. In Singapore, the context will be circuit breaker, but in other countries, it might be more extreme or desperate. And having the government step in creates an institutionalization of stigma. And this makes the difference between normal and abnormal formalized. As a result of this stigma, stigmatized people might resort to a common strategy other people use to fight stigma, and that is often by hiding facts or symptoms of disease. In this case study, I would like to share that how the behavioral interactions between people in close proximity to COVID-19 versus other normal people is generally by discrimination in various ways, such as verbal assault. This can happen in public places, can happen online. And other forms of discrimination could be denigrating campaigns on social media. And some people had their businesses boycotted as well. In Singapore, we also received the news that earlier on, a Singaporean student which was studying at UCL was attacked by people. And they were saying like, I don't want your coronavirus in my country. So this echoes the point earlier on how the people that were being discriminated on might just be based on the race, but they might not actually be dangerous to society. And locally in Singapore, taxi drivers were actually reluctant to pick up people in medical uniforms. And it's not just taxi drivers that are driving this stigma, but also general public. We also saw news that on MRT trains, people will actually try to keep a distance from other people wearing hospital scrubs or wearing medical uniforms. And while the situation here has become less serious, we don't see as much of this occurrence, but I believe in other countries, news are still popping up mentioning this kind of stigma and discriminatory action. And we know that these actions have actually turned violent. Yeah, so this is the case study with regards to COVID-19. And I find that it's quite relevant to our society nowadays. Next, I will move on to talk about the limitations. From reading this reading, I would feel that this reading is very adequate in explaining stigma and how it affects society. but it doesn't go very in-depth to the reasons behind why some attributes are categorized as deviant versus normal, and why some attributes are easier for people to be stigmatized against. This reading also doesn't draw a very good relation between deviant attributes and stigmatization. So for this point, I have two examples. One example is how, with regards to minority versus majority, some traits might be less common and they might belong to the minority group, but these traits are not really deemed as undesirable to society. And on the other hand, the second example is, for example, unemployment. Unemployment could be said to be a minority attribute, but unemployment is stigmatized against, but it is not deemed, but it's not a deviant behavior. So this reading could be further improved by discussing and talking about why certain attributes are damaging to a person's character, or why it's this way specific to a particular culture. As we do not seek out the root cause, we are only being made aware of the stigma, but we don't know how to confront this stigma. So I'll move on to the second limitation, and that is structural stigma. And this is more specific to the case of homelessness. As we have seen in the video, the daughter is actually very accepting of the mother, but the rich girl who was later homeless, previously she didn't understand why homeless people didn't take action to get out of homelessness, and she thought that it's probably because of inaction and they could actually try harder. But actually, in the case of homelessness, job employment often requires an address, and the person that is homeless is unable to provide that address, so usually they wouldn't be considered for any job employment, leaving this person in a cycle. And next, I will talk about the third limitation, which is the psychological reasonings for why one potential reason for why people adopt a certain stigma against the minority in a society. And specific to the case of homelessness, we can see that fundamental attribution error actually comes into play. This is a cognitive bias in the psychological and in social psychology. And it talks about how there is a tendency to overemphasize a certain person's personality and underemphasize the circumstance when you judge a person. So in this case, the rich girl previously mentioned that she felt that people could always have taken more action to get out of homelessness. In saying this, I believe she is attributing more to the fact that they are not taking enough action, which means they might be unmotivated, they might be lazy, or they might have already given up on themselves. And she under-recognized the circumstance factor that traps a person in homelessness and makes it very difficult for them to get out of it. And social psychologists have actually found that this fundamental attribution error is mostly targeted towards other people rather than ourselves. When we do things, we feel that we always have a very good reason, but in other people we see as defective. So this echoes what the rich girl initially said about homelessness, and we can see how her attitude actually shifted a lot after experiencing the homelessness for herself. So this is the three limitations that we can think of for this reading. This is the end of our presentation, and thank you very much for listening through.